Senator Paul has painted a picture of unconstitutional government overreach. We want to hear now from fellow Republican Senator Ron Johnson, who joins us from Green Bay, Wisconsin. And here in Washington, General Michael Hayden, former head of the NSA and the CIA, who used to run the government surveillance programs. He's now a global security consultant. Senator Johnson, you just heard Rand Paul. Do you think that we need more restrictions on these government surveillance programs?
Well, good morning, Chris. Listen, I'm every bit as concerned about civil liberties as Senator Paul, and quite honestly, as most Americans are. And that's a good thing. You know, this is not a partisan issue. You know, across the political spectrum, people are concerned about preserving our liberties and maintaining our civil liberties. But at the same time, you know, we face a very real asymmetric threat in international terrorism, and our greatest line of defense against that terrorism is intelligence gathering capabilities. And so we have to maintain that, and it is a very delicate balance, and that balance shifts based on circumstances, based on the time. But you know, we do need congressional oversight on this. It's a good thing that these laws come up for reauthorization. So I'm every bit as concerned with civil liberties, and we're going to be conducting robust oversight on these programs.
General Hayden, let's talk first of all about the general reaction you have to Senator Paul. Now I'm going to get into some specific issues with you. As the man who used to run these programs, how important, how effective have they been in keeping us safe? And how do you feel when you hear Senator Paul talk about class action lawsuits to the Supreme Court, new congressional restrictions?
Well, first of all, Chris, with regard to how effective they are, I think they're very effective. We've had two very different presidents pretty much doing the same thing with regard to electronic surveillance. That seems to me to suggest that these things do work. Now, with regard to what the senator said, if I believed NSA was doing some of the things the senator fears they're doing, I would have been backstopping him during your first segment. He said we're trolling through billions of records. That's just simply not true. The government acquires records as business records from the telecom providers, but then doesn't go into that database without an arguable reason connected to terrorism to ask that database a question. If you don't have any link to that original predicate, terrorism, your phone records are never touched.
Well, let's get into that, and let's talk a little bit. I know we're getting into kind of sensitive area here about the tradecraft that you were involved with as especially head of the NSA, but also the CIA. According to one estimate, the NSA is getting the phone records of 3 billion of our phone calls every day. 3 billion phone calls every day. Two questions. One, how can you possibly process 3 billion records a day? And secondly, why not just target from the very beginning the bad guys?
Well, first of all, you have to identify who are the bad guys. So let's begin with the acquisition. 3 billion is a big number, but keep in mind, Chris, that our telecommunications providers do that every day on their own. So it's not impossible to do. Now you've got the data stored. Here's the important part, and this is the part that protects civil liberties and balances what Senator Johnson wants to balance, security and our freedom. You ask the database a question, but the question has to be related to terrorism. I'm going to give you a concrete example, so this is very clear. So you roll up someone in Waziristan. You get a cell phone. It's the first time you've ever had that cell phone number. You know it's related to terrorism because of all the other pocket litter you've gotten in that operation. Here's how it works. You simply ask that database, hey, any of you phone numbers in there ever talked to this phone number in Waziristan? I mean, you're already going into the database with a predicate, with a probable cause, with an arguable reason why you're asking for the data.
I've been talking, obviously this has been the subject in Washington and across the country this week. People are concerned about this mountain of data that you have. Okay, I mean, what you say sounds perfectly sensible. You know that there's a guy in Waziristan. You want to know who he's talking to in the United States. One, what do you do with all the records, the billions of records that you have on all of us law-abiding citizens, and what's the potential for abuse with the fact that you have all of that stored in a computer somewhere?
First, answer your question, what do we do with all the other records? Nothing. All right.
You keep it, though.
Oh, of course you do, because I mean, you get the cell phone with that number 6 months from now. You want to know the history of that number. I mean, when does the value of that information begin to age off? So you do retain the information so that you can ask questions of it in the future. With regard to abuse, there are no records of abuse under President Bush, under President Obama. Now, I was criticized because I theoretically didn't have enough oversight mechanisms, but no one accused us of abuse. President Obama has, in some ways, added incredible oversight mechanisms to this. Again, no abuse under either president.
Let me ask you about Obama, and then I promise Senator Johnson I'm going to bring you back in after this final question. Back in 2006, Senator Obama voted against your nomination to be CIA director because of your involvement in government programs. From what you know, and I understand you've been on the outside, how much has he changed? He expanded, restricted these government surveillance programs that he inherited.
In terms of surveillance?
Yes.
Expanded in volume, changed the legal grounding for them a little bit, put it more under congressional authorization rather than the president's Article 2 powers, and added a bit more oversight. But in terms of what NSA is doing, there is incredible continuity between the two presidents.
How do you mean he's expanded in volume?
Well, I mean, just because we've gotten more of these records over time, and with the amendment to the FISA Act in 2008, which Senator Obama finally voted for, NSA is actually empowered to do more things than I was empowered to do under President Bush's special authorization.
Let's turn to foreign policy. Senator Johnson, as we discussed with Senator Paul, the president named a new national security advisor this week, Susan Rice, the former UN ambassador who infamously went out on the Sunday talk shows. One, what do you think of that? And two, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Senator Paul. You're also a member of Senate Foreign Relations. What do you think about the nominations of Victoria Nuland, who was Hillary Clinton's spokeswoman during Benghazi, as an Assistant Secretary of State, and Samantha Power as UN ambassador? And will you use their nominations to try to get some answers on Benghazi?
Oh, first of all, Chris, it's not surprising that President Obama appointed Secretary Rice, but it's disappointing that he chose at this moment when, let's face it, his administration is going through a crisis of credibility. The reason this NSA thing is blown up is because the American people have just lost their faith in President Obama and his administration. I mean, I'm not the only one saying that. New York Times is saying this administration has lost all credibility. And so Susan Rice was the person at the center of misleading America on Benghazi. And so it's incredibly disappointing. And what we need to do on Benghazi, the next step is we need to get the names of the survivors, and we need to get those folks up in front of Congress and tell us exactly what happened, what assets might have been in place. And so if we've got to utilize some of these nominations to get that information, I think that might be an appropriate course of action. But Americans are just losing faith in this administration, and that's not a good thing.
Would you consider putting a hold on either the Nuland or Power nominations as leverage to get this information?
I think that's a possibility. When Secretary Clinton came before our committee, in response to my questioning her, she asked her own question, what difference does it make? We're starting to see the difference it makes when the American people lose faith in this administration. But, I think a healthy distrust of government's a good thing. But what I'd like to do is make sure that Americans start taking a look at the awesome power of government in other areas. The ability to take 45% of your income, 40% of your estate, tell you what doctor you can utilize, what type of health care treatments you're going to be made available to you. So, this is about limiting our government, and Americans do need to be very skeptical of a ever-expanding, ever more powerful government.
General Hayden, I want to ask you about another aspect of the Benghazi attack, because you would have a sense of this firsthand from your experience, and that's the talking points and the whole process involving the talking points. I want to put up on the screen the first draft you'll see there on the left. Those were the first talking points drafted by the CIA. They talked about links to al-Qaeda, about months of attacks against Western interests in Benghazi before the fatal attack on the U.S. consulate. All of that was taken out of the much smaller talking points you see there on the right that Susan Rice used on the Sunday talk shows. This obviously is much more publicized than usually it is. From what you've read, is there anything unusual about the editing process in this case?
Oh, the most unusual thing, Chris, is that CIA was writing the talking points. Look, on a good Sunday morning on the talk shows, you get policy talk. On most Sunday mornings, you get political talk. Neither of those are intelligence talk. And so why is the intelligence organization writing when the page is blank? The way this should happen, Chris, is that the policy guys write down what it is they want to reveal to the American people, and then they send it upriver for CIA, let me be a little flip here, to check the spelling and the facts. Look, Al-Qaeda, terrorist, extremist, those are all words that reasonably accurate describing what happened there. But each one of them is freighted with political cargo. Why do you put the intelligence organization in the role of deciding which of those words to use?
As it turned out, they didn't decide. It was decided by the policy and political people. How do you explain what was left out?
I explained it through a very bad process that began bad by having the intelligence guys draw up the first points.
Finally, Senator Johnson.
Chris, can I just quick?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think what this administration was trying to really cover up is really their gross negligence. Really the fact that they did not only provide the security that was necessary in Benghazi, they actually denied, they actually ramped down the security, basically to make the American people believe that all was well in Benghazi, all was well with their policies of leading from behind. I mean, that's the real story behind Benghazi, and that's really what we need to get to the bottom of.
I got less than a minute left, Senator Johnson. Very generally and briefly, on immigration, which is now on the Senate floor, the big issue on the Senate floor, what changes do you need to see to the legislation for you to support it?
Well, I want to see an immigration bill passed because we have to fix this system. It's not good for anybody. We definitely need to make sure that the borders are going to be secure, and we also need to make sure that basically benefits don't flow to people that are here illegally. And so really, I'm very hopeful that we can pass a bill, but I agree with Senator Paul. The challenge is going to be getting it through the House, so we're going to have to strengthen those provisions in the Senate so we have a bill that passes the House. It doesn't do anybody any good just to pass it in the Senate.
Senator Johnson, General Hayden, want to thank you both
Thanks,
for
Chris.
coming in today.
Thank you.
Pleasure to talk with you as always.